Picture this. You're a millionaire businesswoman who just discovered your husband canceled your invitation to his brother's wedding, but kept your $25,000 funding for the entire celebration. What he doesn't know, you own the luxury hotel chain hosting the event, and you're about to teach him a lesson he'll never forget. This is the story of Sarah Collins, a quiet woman who built a hospitality empire while her family dismissed her success as a little hotel business. For 12 years, she provided silent support, anonymous generosity, and endless patience. But when she received that phone call from the wedding planner, everything changed. Her husband, Mike, thought he was dealing with a pushover wife who would accept humiliation as long as the family got her money. He had no idea he was about to discover the difference between quiet strength and weakness and the devastating consequences of underestimating someone whose influence reached far beyond anything he could imagine. What unfolds next is a masterclass in strategic justice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, family loyalty, and the price of betrayal. This isn't just revenge, it's a complete dismantling of a family conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone suspected. The phone rang at exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, cutting through the gentle hum of my corner office overlooking downtown Burlington. I was reviewing quarterly reports for Collins Hospitality, watching our numbers climb steadily upward, 15 boutique properties across New England, each one carefully curated and profitable. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating awards and industry recognitions that lined my mahogany shelves. Collins Hospitality, Sarah speaking? I answered, expecting another vendor confirmation or partnership proposal. Mrs. Collins, this is Amanda from Elegant Events Planning. I'm calling about the Collins-Hayes wedding scheduled for next month. Her voice carried an odd tension that immediately caught my attention. Of course, Jason and Brittany's wedding. How can I help you? Well, we received some rather unusual instructions yesterday from your husband, Mike. He indicated that you would no longer be attending the celebration, but that all financial arrangements should remain exactly as planned. The words hit me like ice water. I set down my coffee cup with trembling fingers, staring out at the Vermont mountains that had always brought me peace. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Your husband called our office personally. He requested that we remove your name from all guest lists, seating charts, and formal announcements. However, he was very specific about maintaining the $25,000 funding you provided for the venue, catering, and accommodations. The professional composure I had built over 12 years of marriage and 15 years of business success began to crack. Mike had systematically erased me from his brother's wedding while ensuring my money remained untouched. The calculated nature of this betrayal made it infinitely worse than any impulsive act of anger. Mrs. Collins, are you still there? Amanda's voice carried genuine concern. I want to emphasize that this situation feels highly irregular to our team. We've never encountered a scenario where the primary financial contributor was excluded from an event while their funding was retained. I need to call you back, I managed, ending the conversation before my voice could betray the devastation spreading through my chest. I sat in the silence of my office, surrounded by tangible evidence of achievements Mike's family had never bothered to understand. Collins Hospitality had grown from a single bed and breakfast I purchased with my inheritance into a regional empire. Yet Mike still introduced me at social gatherings as his wife who ran a little hotel business. The irony never escaped me that industry colleagues treated me with more respect than my own family demonstrated. I remember Jason's engagement announcement 3 months ago, the conversation that had led to this moment of betrayal. We had gathered at Mike's childhood home for Sunday dinner, the colonial house where Carol Collins still held court over family decisions. Jason sat nervously beside Brittany, his hands shaking as he announced their engagement. The joy in his voice was tempered by obvious financial anxiety. We want to get married next fall, Jason had said, glancing at Brittany with genuine love. But with teacher salaries and Brittany's student loans, we're looking at maybe $5,000 total if we sacrifice everything else. I had listened quietly as the family discussed creative budgeting strategies. Bachelor party at a chain restaurant instead of a weekend getaway. Wedding dress from a discount outlet rather than a bridal boutique. Reception dinner at a community center with folding chairs and paper plates. Mike participated in these discussions with sympathetic concern, occasionally glancing my way with expectant looks. His assumptions never extended to recognizing that I could solve their entire financial dilemma with a check that represented less than 1 week of Colin's hospitality revenue. The conversation continued for over an hour, while I calculated the cost of giving Jason and Brittany everything they had dreamed of. My flagship property in Stowe for the ceremony, with its mountain views and impeccable service, gourmet catering that would create memories lasting decades, luxury accommodations for out-of-town guests, $25,000 total less than I had spent on the artwork in my office. When Carol approached me privately after dinner, her face streaked with tears as she asked if I knew vendors who might donate services for family. I made the decision that would ultimately expose the true nature of my relationships. I can handle the entire wedding cost, I had told her quietly in the kitchen while Mike watched television. But I want this to stay between us. Jason and Brittany should enjoy their day without feeling indebted to family members. Carol's relief had been overwhelming and genuine. She embraced me with desperate gratitude, calling me an answered prayer. Neither of us could have anticipated that this moment of family solidarity would become the foundation for systematic betrayal. Now, sitting in my office while processing Mike's casual disposal of our marriage vows, I understood that my anonymous generosity had created the perfect opportunity for exploitation. By keeping my contributions secret, I had enabled Mike to erase me from the celebration while preserving access to benefits I had provided. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." The casual dismissal stung more than dramatic confrontation would have. Mike was treating this Tuesday like any other day, apparently unconcerned that his wife had discovered his orchestrated humiliation. The man who had shared my bed for 12 years viewed me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. I pulled up my contacts and found David Martinez, my business partner and closest friend. David had helped structure Colin's Hospitality's most complex acquisitions and understood both my professional capabilities and personal vulnerabilities better than anyone. "David, I need your advice on something personal," I said when he answered. "What's wrong? You sound shaken." I explained the wedding planner's call, watching David's silence stretch as the implications became clear to him. He understood business relationships and ethical boundaries better than most people understood basic decency. "Sarah, that's fraud," David said without hesitation. "I don't care what family dynamics were involved. You don't take someone's money and then exclude them from the event. That's theft with manipulation added for cruelty." His straightforward moral clarity highlighted the twisted ethical framework my family had adopted. The people I employed demonstrated more integrity than blood relatives who had benefited from my generosity for years. "Have you considered that this might be strategic rather than merely cruel?" David continued. "Excluding you while keeping your funding sends a very specific message about your place in their hierarchy. You're valuable for resources, but not worthy of inclusion in celebrations." His analysis cut through the emotional confusion that family betrayal creates. This was not random cruelty or impulsive drama, but calculated degradation designed to establish permanent boundaries. They were teaching me that I could fund their happiness, but should never expect to share in it. As the afternoon sun shifted across my office windows, I made a decision that would reshape every relationship in my life. I would not quietly accept this betrayal or pretend it represented a misunderstanding that patience could resolve. Mike had made a choice to humiliate me while stealing my money. Now he would learn what happened when you betrayed someone whose success extended far beyond his comprehension. I arrived home that evening to find Mike in his usual spot on the living room couch, beer in hand, watching ESPN highlights. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal given the earthquake that had shifted through my day. He looked up with his standard greeting smile, completely at ease, apparently convinced that his secret had remained secure. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" he asked, his tone carrying the casual affection of someone whose conscience was perfectly clear. "Interesting," I replied, setting down my purse and studying his face for any sign of guilt or anxiety. "I got a call from Amanda at Elegant Events Planning." Mike's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated awareness. "Oh, something about Jason's wedding. She mentioned some confusion about guest arrangements, something about me being removed from the invitation list while my funding remains in place." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Mike set down his beer with deliberate care, his casual demeanor shifting into defensive preparation. When he finally spoke, His words carried the calculated tone of someone who had rehearsed justifications. Look, Sarah, I was trying to prevent family drama. You know how these events can get emotional, and Mom thought it might be better to keep things smaller. The euphemistic language revealed careful planning. Family drama replaced the truth of coordinated exclusion. Mom thought suggested collaborative decision-making rather than acknowledging his personal choice to betray me. Mike, you stole $25,000 from me while orchestrating my public humiliation? How does that qualify as preventing drama? I didn't steal anything, he snapped, his defensiveness rising. You offered that money as a gift to help Jason. Gifts don't come with strings attached. The victim blaming reached breathtaking heights. Mike was transforming my anonymous generosity into an obligation-free windfall that absolved him of any responsibility toward me. Gifts typically come with basic respect for the giver, I said, my voice carrying the authority that had negotiated million-dollar acquisitions. They don't usually involve stealing money while assassinating someone's character to wedding vendors. Mike stood abruptly, his height an intimidation tactic he had never needed to use during our marriage. Your success has made you arrogant. Sarah, you think funding something gives you the right to control everything about it. The accusation revealed deeper resentment that had festered throughout our relationship. Mike had watched my business achievements with growing bitterness, interpreting my success as arrogance, rather than recognizing the dedication that built Colin's hospitality from nothing. 12 years of supporting your career, funding our lifestyle, and accepting your family's dismissive treatment, I replied. And you think I'm the arrogant one? See, this is exactly the kind of emotional reaction we were trying to avoid at the wedding. Jason doesn't need his celebration ruined by your need to be the center of attention. Mike was rewriting our marriage history in real time, transforming years of my quiet support into attention-seeking behavior that justified his betrayal. The man who had benefited daily from my success now painted me as a narcissist whose presence would ruin celebrations funded by her own generosity. My phone rang before I could respond, Jason's name appearing on the screen. Mike's expression shifted to relief, as if his brother's call would provide reinforcement for his position. Sarah, I wanted to call personally, Jason began, his voice carrying weary obligation rather than genuine emotion. I appreciate everything you've done for the wedding, but the family thinks it might be better to keep the guest list smaller. The coordinated timing felt deliberate. Jason was calling while Mike stood nearby, providing real-time family solidarity against the woman whose money had made their celebration possible. Jason, I funded your entire wedding. Does that reality factor into your understanding of appropriate guest list decisions? His uncomfortable laughter revealed everything about his moral framework. Sarah, you offered that money as a gift. We're incredibly grateful, but gifts don't create obligations. The man whose teaching career was built on ethical education could not recognize the foundation supporting his own wedding celebration. He had transformed my anonymous generosity into an entitlement that absolved him of any responsibility toward me. I see, I said, understanding, finally crystallizing. So the family position is that I can fund your happiness, but shouldn't expect to share in it. That's not what anyone said, Jason protested, but his tone carried the hollow defense of someone who knew exactly what he was defending. After hanging up, I faced Mike's satisfied expression. He genuinely believed that Jason's call had vindicated his position and demonstrated family unity against my unreasonable expectations. The whole family agrees this is the right approach, Mike said with renewed confidence. Sometimes you need to step back and let other people handle things without trying to control every detail. The casual dismissal of theft and betrayal as control issues revealed how completely Mike misunderstood both the situation and my response to his cruelty. He had orchestrated my humiliation while stealing my money, then characterized my objection as evidence that his original decision was justified. Mike, you excluded me from a wedding I funded completely while keeping my money. If you can explain how that represents reasonable family behavior, I'm willing to listen. You're being dramatic, Sarah. This is exactly why the family thought your presence might create problems. You turn everything into a personal attack instead of thinking about what's best for Jason and Brittany. The circular logic would have been impressive if it were not so morally bankrupt. Mike had created the problem, used my reaction as justification for the original betrayal, and positioned himself as the rational family member, protecting others from my instability. I walked to our kitchen window, looking out at the garden I had planted during the early years of our marriage. The roses I had tended through countless seasons now felt like symbols of investment that would never bloom into recognition or appreciation. I'm going to ask you one more time. Mike, will you call Amanda and restore my invitation to Jason's wedding? No, he said without hesitation. The family has made this decision, and we're sticking with it. You can either accept it gracefully or prove that we made the right choice. The ultimatum revealed everything about Mike's understanding of power dynamics in our marriage. He genuinely believed that his family's coordinated betrayal should be accepted without consequences, that I would choose peaceful submission over defending my dignity. That night, lying in our bed while Mike slept peacefully beside me, I confronted the devastating loneliness that follows betrayal by those we trust most completely. The silence stretched between us like an ocean, filled with 12 years of shared memories that now felt like elaborate deceptions. My business empire, my financial independence, my reputation for integrity throughout the hospitality industry. None of these achievements mattered when facing the hollow recognition that my own family had secretly planned my exclusion while depending on my continued generosity. But as I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, a different kind of clarity began emerging. Mike had made a critical error in his calculations. He had assumed that the quiet woman who preferred anonymous generosity would continue accepting humiliation rather than exercising the power she had spent 15 years building. Tomorrow, I would begin teaching him about the difference between generosity and weakness, between patience and submission. The family that had dismissed my achievements was about to discover exactly what those accomplishments meant when directed with focused precision. The quiet woman they had all underestimated was finally ready to play at her actual capability level. The morning brought no relief from the emotional devastation of the previous night. I woke to find Mike already gone, having left earlier than usual without explanation or goodbye. The emptiness of our kitchen felt different now, charged with the knowledge that the man I had shared coffee with for 12 years viewed me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. I called David from my car during the drive to work, needing his analytical perspective to help process what felt like deliberate psychological warfare. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," David said without preamble. "This level of coordination suggests more planning than you might realize. Have you considered investigating what else might be going on? What do you mean on a family conspiracies this elaborate usually have deeper roots? Mike didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal your money and exclude you from a wedding. This kind of systematic betrayal often masks other deceptions." David's business instincts had served Colin's hospitality well through challenging negotiations and hostile takeover attempts. If he sensed deeper problems, I needed to pay attention. Where would I even start? Financial records, communication patterns, family dynamics you might have overlooked. People who can orchestrate this level of emotional manipulation usually have practice. I spent the morning reviewing our personal financial accounts with the same analytical precision I applied to business audits. What I discovered made my stomach clench with recognition of my own naive trust. Mike had borrowed against our house 3 months ago, a $30,000 home equity loan I had never been told about. The paperwork showed his signature alone, but Massachusetts law required spousal notification for such transactions. Either he had forged my consent or convinced the bank that I had agreed to something I had never been informed about. The loan proceeds had been transferred to something called Collins Investment Ventures, a business entity I had never heard of, despite sharing Mike's last name. My hands shook as I traced the money trail through our joint checking account. The investment venture had failed within 6 weeks, the entire amount lost in what appeared to be a cryptocurrency scheme that promised guaranteed returns. Mike had gambled away enough money to fund Jason's wedding and never mentioned it. Now he was keeping my wedding contribution to offset losses from his secret financial disaster. I called our bank, using my business credentials to request information about the loan application process. "Mrs. Collins, I show electronic consent authorization for spousal notification." The loan officer explained, "The system indicates you confirmed approval through our online portal." "What date and time was that authorization submitted?" "March 15th at 2:47 p.m. I checked my calendar from that day. March 15th, I had been in Boston meeting with potential investors for Collins Hospitality's expansion into Maine. Security cameras and credit card receipts could prove I was nowhere near a computer at that time. Mike had forged my digital consent to steal money from our home, lost it through reckless gambling, and was now using my wedding funding to cover his tracks. The systematic nature of his deception revealed planning that extended far beyond the wedding betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Sarah, I hope you understand that family situations can become complicated. Perhaps it would be best to focus on Jason's happiness rather than creating unnecessary drama. The carefully chosen phrases revealed how thoroughly Mike had briefed his family about containing my reaction. Carol spoke as if witnessing a minor disagreement rather than addressing systematic theft and humiliation orchestrated by her son. I drove to David's office, needing his perspective on discoveries that transformed my understanding of my marriage from betrayal to fraud. 30,000 in secret gambling debts, David said after reviewing the financial records I had printed. Electronic fraud to access home equity. Character assassination to wedding vendors. Sarah, this isn't just family drama. This is criminal behavior. What am I supposed to do? Call the police on my own husband? You're supposed to protect yourself before this gets worse. Men who can lie this systematically rarely stop at one major deception. David pulled up Collins Hospitality's corporate banking records, cross-referencing them with dates from Mike's financial activities. Look at this, he said, pointing to his computer screen. Mike called our corporate bank 2 weeks ago asking about your signature authority on business accounts. The representative logged his inquiry as routine spousal verification, but he was fishing for information about accessing company funds. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mike was not content with stealing from our personal assets. He was investigating ways to access Collins Hospitality's accounts. How much does he think I'm worth? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Based on his questions to the bank, he believes you have direct access to about $2 million in liquid corporate assets. He's not entirely wrong. You could authorize those transfers in an emergency. $2 million. Mike was planning theft that would destroy everything I had built over 15 years of careful growth and strategic investment. David, I need you to help me understand something. If Mike has been planning this level of deception, who else in his family might be involved? We spent the afternoon investigating the Collins family's recent financial activities using public records and business databases. What we discovered painted a picture of coordinated desperation that explained the wedding conspiracy. Carol had refinanced her house 6 months ago, extracting $40,000 in equity that had disappeared into credit card debt and personal loans. Jason and Brittany had maxed out multiple credit cards planning their wedding before my intervention. Mike's sister Jennifer had declared bankruptcy the previous year. The entire Collins family was drowning in debt while believing that Sarah Collins represented a renewable financial resource rather than a human being with dignity and boundaries. They've been planning this for months, David said, reviewing the timeline of their financial disasters. The wedding was never about celebrating Jason and Brittany. It was about establishing access to your money while removing your ability to object. My phone rang with Jason's number, and I put it on speaker so David could hear the conversation. Sarah, I need to ask you something directly, Jason began with careful formality. Are you planning to cause problems for the wedding because Brittany is getting stressed about vendor issues, and we just want our day to be perfect? The victim blaming reached new depths of manipulation. Jason was positioning me as responsible for chaos created by his family's betrayal, while characterizing their theft as decisions that reasonable people should accept. Jason, what vendor issues are you referring to? Some of the suppliers are asking weird questions about authorization and payment approval. It's making Brittany nervous that something might go wrong. The vendors were conducting due diligence because industry professionals recognized the ethical problems with Mike's instructions. Wedding planners understood that excluding financial contributors while retaining their funding violated basic business ethics. The vendors are asking appropriate questions, I said carefully. When payment comes from one source but coordination comes from another, responsible businesses seek clarification. Well, can you just call them and confirm everything is fine? We don't want any complications. Jason wanted me to authorize my own humiliation while reassuring vendors that stealing my money was perfectly acceptable. The audacity was breathtaking in its casual cruelty. I'll consider it, I said, ending the call before my composure could crack completely. David looked at me with the expression he reserved for particularly challenging business negotiations. Sarah, you realize they're planning to manipulate you into authorizing your own exploitation? What do you mean? They'll arrange a family meeting where everyone apologizes and begs for forgiveness. You'll feel guilty and generous, Agree to authorize vendor payments while remaining excluded from the celebration. They get your money, keep you away from the wedding, and maintain the moral high ground by accepting your gracious sacrifice. The strategic analysis felt accurate and devastating. My family had planned not just betrayal, but emotional manipulation designed to make me grateful for the opportunity to fund my own humiliation. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing Collins Hospitality's vendor relationships and industry connections. 15 years of building professional networks had created influence that extended far beyond what my family understood. But more importantly, those relationships were built on mutual respect, ethical conduct, and reciprocal loyalty values that my own family had apparently never learned to appreciate. The quiet woman they had all underestimated was about to demonstrate the difference between family obligation and business consequence, and the education would begin tomorrow. The family meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at Carol's house, the colonial where Mike had grown up and where major family decisions were still made under his mother's watchful supervision. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained evidence of Mike's financial deceptions and a strategy for reclaiming my dignity. Carol had arranged the living room like a mediation session, with chairs forming a circle that suggested equality while she retained the power position near the fireplace. Mike sat to her right, Jason and Brittany across from me, everyone's faces carrying the careful neutrality of people who had rehearsed their roles. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Carol began with the gracious tone she used for family crisis management. "I think we all recognize that some misunderstandings have developed around Jason's wedding, and we want to address them as a family." The euphemistic language continued. Misunderstandings replaced deliberate betrayal. Address them suggested collaborative problem-solving rather than acknowledging systematic theft and humiliation. "Before we discuss misunderstandings," I said, opening my portfolio with deliberate precision, "I think everyone should understand the financial context of recent family decisions." I distributed copies of Mike's home equity loan documents, credit card statements, and the failed investment records David had helped me compile. The silence that followed was profound as each family member processed evidence of deceptions they had not anticipated. Mike borrowed $30,000 against our house without my knowledge, lost it in a cryptocurrency scheme, and is now using my wedding contribution to cover his gambling debts. Carol's face went pale as she reviewed the paperwork. Jason stared at his brother with growing confusion. Brittany looked between the documents and Mike with the expression of someone whose worldview was being fundamentally reorganized. "That's not what happened," Mike said, his defensive anger rising. "I made an investment that didn't work out. Married couples don't need to discuss every financial decision. Forging spousal consent for home equity loans isn't a financial decision. Mike, it's fraud." The word hung in the air like an accusation that could not be retracted or softened. I had evidence of criminal behavior, and everyone in the room understood the implications. "Sarah, let's not escalate this situation unnecessarily," Carol said, her voice carrying the desperate tone of someone trying to contain a crisis that had exceeded her management capabilities. "Families work through financial difficulties together." "Absolutely," I agreed, allowing hope to creep into my voice as if their appeals for family unity were touching my heart. "I'm willing to work through this situation together, but I need certain things to happen." The relief in the room was palpable. They had expected confrontation and were receiving cooperation. Mike's defensive posture relaxed slightly. Carol leaned forward with renewed authority. Jason and Brittany exchanged glances that suggested their wedding might be saved after all. "First, I want my invitation to Jason's wedding restored immediately, with full recognition of my contribution to making the celebration possible." "Of course," Carol said quickly. "That was always our intention. The guest list confusion was just a miscommunication. Second, I want public acknowledgement during the reception of my generosity and the family's gratitude for making their dream wedding possible." "Absolutely," Jason said, speaking for the first time since reviewing the financial documents. "Sarah, we are incredibly grateful for everything you've done. Third, I want Mike to sign a formal agreement acknowledging his fraudulent loan application and committing to full restitution within 6 months." Mike's expression darkened, but Carol shot him a warning look that said, "Accept this compromise or face worse consequences." "Fine," Mike said through gritted teeth. "I'll sign whatever you want." The meeting continued for another hour as we worked through details that felt like genuine family reconciliation. Wedding logistics were discussed with my input. Vendor communications were clarified to restore my authority over decisions affecting the celebration. Mike's financial restitution was documented in writing. By the time I left Carol's house, I felt vindicated and generous. The family had acknowledged their mistakes, apologized for their treatment of me, and agreed to terms that restored my dignity while addressing Mike's deceptions. I called David that afternoon with an update that carried genuine optimism. They completely folded when I presented the financial evidence, I told him. Mike agreed to restitution, my wedding invitation is restored, and they're planning public recognition of my contribution during the reception. That seems too easy, David said, his skepticism evident even through the phone. People who plan elaborate betrayals don't usually surrender completely when confronted with evidence. Sometimes facing consequences changes people's perspectives. Maybe they realized how far they had gone and decided to make things right. Maybe, David said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. Just be careful, Sarah. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparation that felt like genuine family collaboration. Carol called regularly with updates and questions that seemed to value my input. Jason and Brittany included me in vendor meetings and decision-making sessions. Even Mike appeared to be making efforts to rebuild trust in our marriage. I allowed myself to feel hopeful about family relationships that had seemed permanently damaged. Perhaps the shock of discovery had forced everyone to confront behaviors they had not fully recognized. Perhaps my willingness to forgive had created space for authentic change. The Thursday before the wedding, I received a call from Amanda at Elegant Events Planning that should have been routine confirmation, but carried an undertone that made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Mrs. Collins, I wanted to touch base about final arrangements for tomorrow's rehearsal dinner. We received some updated instructions from your husband this morning that I wanted to verify with you directly. What kind of updated instructions? He mentioned that your role in the wedding coordination should be more behind the scenes to avoid any potential stress. He suggested that we handle most communication through Carol Collins going forward, with you remaining available for financial authorization as needed. The careful phrasing could not disguise what was actually happening. Mike was systematically removing my authority while preserving my financial responsibility. I was being reduced to a checkbook that could be accessed when convenient, but otherwise kept away from actual decision-making. Did my husband provide any specific reasoning for these changes? He mentioned that you've been under significant stress lately and that the family wanted to minimize any additional pressure during the wedding weekend. Mike was using the same character assassination tactics he had employed before, painting me as emotionally unstable while positioning his manipulation as protective concern. Amanda, please disregard any instructions that don't come directly from me. I am the primary financial contributor and should remain the primary contact for all vendor coordination. Of course, Mrs. Collins. I apologize for any confusion. After hanging up, I sat in my office processing the recognition that nothing had actually changed. The family meeting, the apologies, the signed agreements, all of it had been theater designed to pacify me while they refined their approach. They had not abandoned their plan to exclude me while keeping my money. They had simply made it more sophisticated and harder to detect. I called David immediately, my voice shaking with the fury of someone who had been manipulated into believing in redemption that never existed. You were right, I said. They never intended to honor any of the agreements from the family meeting. Mike is still trying to remove my authority while keeping my financial support. Sarah, I'm sorry. I hoped I was wrong. What kind of people plan something this elaborate? The kind who view you as a resource rather than a person. The kind who believe your money belongs to them, but your presence is inconvenient. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my willingness to forgive had been transformed into a weapon for my own continued humiliation. The family that had claimed to value reconciliation was simply looking for more sophisticated ways to exploit my generosity while maintaining my exclusion. But this time, I would not be caught off guard by their deception. This time, I would respond with the full force of capabilities they had never bothered to understand or respect. The quiet woman they continued to underestimate was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Friday morning brought a call that would shatter what remained of my faith in the man I had married. David's voice carried the grim satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed in the worst possible way. Sarah, I have information you need to hear, but it's going to be difficult. I was in my office, reviewing final wedding arrangements while trying to maintain professional composure, despite the emotional turmoil of recent revelations. What did you find? Mike has been having an affair with Jessica Walsh, Brittany's maid of honor. My investigator has photographs from last Tuesday when they met at the Marriott downtown. They've been seeing each other for at least 3 months. The words hit me like a physical blow, though part of me had sensed something beyond mere family loyalty driving Mike's recent behavior. The systematic nature of his betrayal suddenly made sense when viewed through the lens of a man who had emotionally detached from our marriage while planning his exit strategy. 3 months, I repeated, processing the timeline. That would have started right around when Jason announced his engagement. There's more. Sarah, Jessica has been feeding Mike information about your business activities. She works for a financial consulting firm that specializes in hospitality industry valuations. Mike has been using their relationship to investigate Collins Hospitality's actual worth. The revelation transformed my understanding of recent events from family drama to calculated theft. Mike had not stumbled into betrayal, he had planned it with inside information about my company's value and vulnerabilities. How much does he think he can take? Based on the documents my investigator photographed, Mike believes he's entitled to half of Collins Hospitality in a divorce settlement. He's been building a case that your business success was made possible by his emotional and financial support during the early years. The audacity was breathtaking. Mike had contributed nothing to Collins Hospitality beyond occasional complaints about my work schedule. Now he was claiming co-ownership of an empire he had consistently dismissed as a hobby business. David, there's something else I need to tell you. The bank called this morning about irregularities in our business account access logs. What kind of irregularities? Someone has been attempting to verify my digital signature protocols for large fund transfers. The attempts were sophisticated enough to suggest professional assistance. David's silence stretched as he processed the implications. Sarah, I think you need to prepare for the possibility that Mike is planning to drain your business accounts as soon as he can establish access. My hands began shaking as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The wedding exclusion was not the end goal. It was camouflage for systematic financial theft that would destroy everything I had built over 15 years. The affair, the wedding betrayal, the character assassination, I said, pieces clicking into place. All of it was designed to position me as an unstable wife whose business judgment couldn't be trusted. Mike can establish that you're emotionally unfit to manage Collins Hospitality. He can petition for temporary control of company assets during divorce proceedings. The phone rang before David could continue explaining legal vulnerabilities I had never considered. Mike's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the controlled composure that had carried me through countless business crises. Sarah, we need to talk about something important, Mike said, his voice carrying false urgency that I now recognized as manipulation. There's been a development with the wedding that requires immediate attention. What kind of development? Jason and Brittany are having second thoughts about the scale of celebration you've planned. They're worried that such an elaborate event might overshadow the significance of their commitment to each other. The creative reframing was masterful in its psychological manipulation. Mike was characterizing my generosity as excessive display that threatened the couple's spiritual focus on marriage, rather than acknowledging their gratitude for making their dreams possible. Are you suggesting they want to cancel the wedding? Not cancel, but significantly scale back. Maybe move it to a smaller venue, reduce the guest count, simplify the catering. They're concerned that your investment has created expectations that don't align with their values. Mike was systematically dismantling the celebration while positioning my funding as the problem rather than recognizing it as the solution to their financial limitations. Mike, I've already paid for everything. The vendors have been confirmed. The arrangements are finalized. That's what I wanted to discuss. If we simplify the celebration, there would be significant cost savings that could be redirected toward other family priorities. Other family priorities. Mike was not even pretending that my money would be returned. He was openly discussing how to redistribute my funding to serve the Collins family's broader financial needs. What other priorities are you referring to? Well, Carol is struggling with some medical expenses that aren't fully covered by insurance. and Jason and Brittany could use help with their mortgage down payment. Your generosity could make a much bigger impact if it were allocated more strategically. The casual discussion of redirecting my wedding contribution toward their personal debts revealed how completely Mike viewed my money as family property, rather than recognizing it as my individual generosity with specific boundaries. I see. And what role would I play in this simplified celebration? Obviously, you would be honored as a special family member whose support made everything possible, but maybe in a way that doesn't create pressure for other guests who couldn't contribute at your level. Mike was proposing to exclude me from the wedding while keeping my money, and then thanking me for my sacrifice in a way that would avoid embarrassing other family members who had not funded the celebration. Mike, I need to ask you something directly. Are you having an affair with Jessica Walsh? The silence that followed confirmed everything David's investigator had discovered. When Mike finally spoke, his words carried the desperate damage control of someone whose carefully constructed deceptions were collapsing. That's a ridiculous accusation. Sarah, I'm trying to help our family work through complex logistics, and you're creating paranoid conspiracy theories. I have photographs. Mike, 3 months of hotel meetings, restaurant dates, intimate conversations in public places. Those were business consultations. Jessica has expertise in hospitality industry valuations that I thought might be helpful for understanding your company's growth potential. The lie was so obviously constructed that it felt insulting to my intelligence. Mike was claiming that secret meetings with his brother's fiance's best friend represented business research rather than acknowledging the affair that had motivated his betrayal. What exactly did you need to understand about my company's growth potential? I wanted to surprise you with insights about expansion opportunities. Jessica's firm specializes in strategic planning for regional hospitality companies. Mike was improvising desperately now, creating explanations that could not survive basic scrutiny. No legitimate business consultation would require secret meetings at hotels or intimate dinners disguised as chance encounters. Mike, I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me the truth about your relationship with Jessica and your plans for Colin's hospitality. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice carrying the stubborn denial of someone who believed persistence could overcome evidence. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing financial documents that revealed the true scope of threats to everything I had built. Mike's attempted access to business accounts, his investigation of company valuations, his coordination with family members drowning in debt, all of it pointed towards systematic theft disguised as family crisis management. But as I studied the evidence David had compiled, I realized that Mike had made a critical error in his planning. He had assumed that the quiet woman who preferred anonymous generosity would continue accepting betrayal rather than defending herself with the full force of capabilities she had spent decades developing. Tomorrow's wedding would provide the perfect stage for demonstrating exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone whose influence extended far beyond anything the Collins family had ever imagined. The woman they had all underestimated was finally ready to reveal the difference between patience and weakness, between generosity and submission. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity that seemed to mock the chaos brewing beneath the surface of what should have been a day of celebration. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that projected authority while remaining appropriate for family events. Knowing that every detail of my appearance would be scrutinized by people who had spent months planning my humiliation, the wedding ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at my flagship property in Stowe, with reception dinner to follow in the restored 19th century barn that had become Collins Hospitality's signature venue. 43 guests would witness Jason and Brittany's union, unaware that they were also attending the final act of a family betrayal that had escalated far beyond wedding logistics. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Evidence package delivered to your office safe. Legal team standing by. You sure about this approach? I was sure. After 12 years of accepting minimal recognition while providing maximum support, after months of systematic deception and financial fraud, after discovering that my husband was planning to steal my life's work while publicly humiliating me, I was absolutely sure. The drive to Stowe took 45 minutes through Vermont mountains that had always provided perspective during challenging business negotiations. Today, those peaks seemed to offer witness to a reckoning that would reshape every relationship in my life. I arrived at the venue to find organized chaos as vendors made final preparations under Amanda's careful supervision. The mountain setting was spectacular, with October foliage creating a natural backdrop that no amount of money could purchase or improve. Everything was perfect, elegant, and meaningful in ways that Jason and Brittany's original budget would never have achieved. Carol approached me in the main lodge with the careful smile she used for managing family tensions during important events. "Sarah, you look lovely. I wanted to thank you again for making this celebration possible. Your generosity has given Jason and Brittany memories that will last forever." The performance was flawless, delivered with enough emotional weight to seem genuine while carefully avoiding acknowledgement of the systematic betrayal that had preceded this moment. "I'm glad everything worked out," I replied with matching diplomatic warmth. "Families should support each other during important milestones." "Absolutely. And I hope you know that despite any recent misunderstandings, you are truly appreciated by everyone in our family." Recent misunderstandings. Carol was characterizing months of deception, financial fraud, and character assassination as minor communication problems that mature adults should overlook for the sake of family harmony. Mike appeared with Jason and his groomsmen, all wearing rental tuxedos that had cost more than Jason's monthly teaching salary. My husband looked confident and relaxed, apparently convinced that his manipulations had achieved their intended goals. "Sarah, you made it," Mike said with the casual affection of someone whose conscience was perfectly clear. "Everything looks amazing. You really outdid yourself with this venue." The dismissive phrasing was deliberate. Mike was characterizing my ownership of the property as enthusiastic party planning, rather than acknowledging that I controlled every aspect of the infrastructure supporting their celebration. "Thank you," I said simply, saving energy for conversations that would matter more than these final exchanges of false pleasantries. Jessica Walsh appeared with the other bridesmaids, wearing a blush-colored dress that complemented her auburn hair. She moved with the careful confidence of someone who believed her secrets remained secure, apparently unaware that her 3-month affair with Mike had been thoroughly documented by professional investigators. When our eyes met across the lodge, Jessica smiled with the warm friendliness she had maintained throughout the wedding planning process. Her performance was remarkable, displaying no guilt, anxiety, or recognition that she was looking at the wife of the man she had been betraying. "Mrs. Collins, the venue is absolutely stunning," Jessica said, approaching with genuine enthusiasm. "Brittany and Jason are so lucky to have family who can make dreams like this come true." The casual reference to luck, rather than acknowledging the specific generosity that had made the celebration possible, revealed how completely the Collins family had reframed my contributions. I was not a benefactor whose kindness had enabled their happiness. I was simply someone whose resources had been properly allocated toward their priorities. "I'm sure they'll have a wonderful day," I replied, noting how Jessica's gaze lingered on Mike as he laughed with his groomsmen near the fireplace. The ceremony itself unfolded with flawless precision that reflected months of careful planning and unlimited budget allocation. Jason and Brittany exchanged vows beneath an arch of mountain laurel and autumn leaves, their faces radiant with joy that felt genuine despite the dysfunction that had preceded this moment. As they promised to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life might bring, I found myself wondering if their marriage would survive the revelation of how it had been funded and the family dynamics that would define their future relationships. During the cocktail hour that followed, I circulated among guests with the social grace that had served me through countless business events. Most of the attendees were strangers: Jason's teaching colleagues, Brittany's college friends, distant relatives who rarely involved themselves in family affairs. None of them knew that the elegant celebration surrounding them existed only because of a woman who had been systematically excluded from planning while funding every detail. They simply enjoyed premium cocktails, gourmet appetizers, and breathtaking mountain views while assuming that someone else had managed the complex logistics of creating such perfection. Carol approached me during dinner, her face carrying the relieved satisfaction of someone whose careful planning had achieved its intended results. "Sarah, I wanted to speak with you privately about something important," she said, guiding me toward a quiet corner of the reception barn. "Of course. Mike mentioned that you've been under significant stress lately with business pressures and family obligations. We're all concerned about your well-being and wanted you to know that we support whatever decisions you make about your future involvement in family events." The carefully chosen phrases could not disguise what Carol was actually communicating. She was offering me permanent exclusion from Colin's family gatherings while framing it as concern for my mental health, rather than acknowledging their coordinated betrayal. "That's very thoughtful," I said, maintaining the diplomatic composure that had carried me through this entire charade. "We also wanted to discuss the possibility of your continued financial support for other family needs. Given your incredible generosity with Jason's wedding, there are several situations where your assistance could make a tremendous difference." Carol was pitching me for additional funding while simultaneously excluding me from the relationships those contributions were supposed to support. She genuinely believed that I would continue providing money while accepting permanent exile from family celebrations. "What kinds of situations are you referring to?" "Well, my medical expenses have been challenging lately, and Jason and Brittany could use help with their mortgage down payment. Mike mentioned some business opportunities that require initial capital investment." Business opportunities. Carol was openly discussing Mike's plans to steal from Colin's hospitality while characterizing theft as investment opportunities that deserve family support. "I'll certainly consider it," I said, though my tone carried finality that should have warned her about the futility of such requests. As the reception dinner continued around us, I watched Mike and Jessica maintain careful distance while exchanging glances that spoke of intimate coordination. They had planned this entire weekend as celebration of their successful manipulation, apparently confident that their deceptions would remain undetected indefinitely. But as the evening progressed toward its conclusion, I realized that Mike had made one final, critical error in his calculations. He had assumed that his quiet wife would continue accepting humiliation rather than exercising power she had spent 15 years building through strategic thinking and consequences for those who violated business relationships. The family that had dismissed my achievements was about to discover exactly what those accomplishments meant when directed with focused precision and unlimited resources. Tomorrow, they would begin learning the difference between generosity and weakness, between patience and submission, and the education would reshape every assumption they had maintained about power, respect, and the cost of betraying someone whose influence extended far beyond their comprehension. Sunday morning brought the kind of crisp October clarity that made Vermont's mountains seem close enough to touch. I had spent the night in the owner's suite at my Stowe property, surrounded by luxury accommodations that reflected 15 years of building Colin's hospitality from nothing into a regional powerhouse. The irony was not lost on me that I was sleeping alone in my own hotel, while my husband of 12 years shared a bed with his brother's new sister-in-law 40 miles away. I had coffee on the private terrace overlooking valleys that stretched toward New Hampshire, reviewing the decision that would reshape every relationship in my life. David's evidence package sat open on the dining table: photographs of Mike and Jessica's affair, documentation of financial fraud, records of systematic character assassination coordinated across the Collins family. The nuclear option required careful timing and strategic precision. It was not enough to expose their deceptions. I needed to demonstrate consequences that would serve as permanent education about the cost of betraying someone whose capabilities they had never bothered to understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Hope you enjoyed the wedding weekend. Looking forward to discussing next steps for our family's financial planning when you get home." Next steps for financial planning. Mike was openly discussing his theft of Colin's hospitality as collaborative family strategy, rather than recognizing it as criminal fraud that would destroy him personally and professionally. I called David from the terrace, watching morning mist rise from valleys that had witnessed countless family dramas over generations of Vermont residents. "It's time," I said simply. "Sarah, are you absolutely certain once we trigger this sequence, there's no going back to quiet family accommodation?" 12 years of quiet accommodation enabled them to plan systematic theft of everything I've built. They made their choice when they decided I was valuable for resources but disposable as a person. "Understood. Legal team is standing by. Corporate communications ready for release. Financial protections are in place." The first call went to Amanda at Elegant Events Planning, whose professional integrity had been compromised by Mike's instructions throughout the wedding coordination process. "Amanda, this is Sarah Collins. I need to inform you about irregularities in the financial arrangements for yesterday's celebration." "Mrs. Collins, is there a problem with our services?" The problem is that my husband has been providing instructions about an event he neither funded nor authorized, while systematically excluding me from coordination of a celebration I paid for completely. I apologize if there was any confusion about authorization protocols. There was no confusion. Amanda, there was fraud. Mike Collins has no authority over Collins hospitality events or financial arrangements. All future communications should reflect that reality. The second call went to Marcus Chen, president of New England Hospitality Associates, the industry organization that had recognized my contributions to regional tourism development for over a decade. Marcus, I need to discuss a situation that affects industry integrity standards. Sarah, what's going on? My husband has been systematically misrepresenting his connection to Collins Hospitality while attempting to establish access to corporate accounts through fraudulent means. I'm providing formal notification that Michael Collins has no authority over my company operations or financial decisions. Are you suggesting criminal activity? I'm documenting criminal activity. Mike forged spousal consent for home equity loans, attempted unauthorized access to business accounts, and coordinated character assassination designed to undermine my professional credibility. Marcus's silence reflected his understanding of implications that extended far beyond family drama into territory that threatened industry reputation and regulatory compliance. Sarah, what do you need from our organization? Nothing except awareness that any future claims about Michael Collins representing Collins Hospitality should be treated as potential fraud. The third call went to Detective Robert Hayes of the Vermont State Police Financial Crimes Unit, whom I had met through charitable events supporting local law enforcement training programs. Detective Hayes, I need to report systematic financial fraud that involves identity theft, forged signatures, and attempted unauthorized access to business accounts. Mrs. Collins, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation? Comprehensive documentation prepared by forensic accountants and private investigators, home equity fraud, electronic signature forgery, attempted corporate account access, and evidence of coordinated conspiracy to steal company assets. How much money are we discussing? Immediate theft of $30,000 through home equity fraud, attempted theft of approximately $2 million through unauthorized business account access. Detective Hayes' tone shifted to official formality as he recognized that this was not domestic dispute, but major financial crime requiring immediate investigation. Mrs. Collins, I'll need you to come in this morning to file formal charges and provide evidence for our review. The fourth call went to Jennifer Walsh, Jessica's older sister and a partner at the law firm that handled Collins Hospitality's corporate legal matters. Jennifer, I need to inform you about a conflict of interest that affects your firm's representation of my company. Sarah, what kind of conflict? Your sister Jessica has been conducting a 3-month affair with my husband while providing him confidential information about Collins Hospitality's financial structure and vulnerabilities. The silence that followed was profound as Jennifer processed implications that could destroy both her sister's career and her law firm's reputation for ethical conduct. Are you certain about these allegations? Photographic evidence, documented meetings, financial records showing coordination between Jessica's hospitality consulting work and Mike's attempted access to my business accounts? Sarah, I need to recuse my firm from Collins Hospitality representation immediately to avoid ethical violations. I understand. I'll be seeking new legal counsel to address both the corporate fraud and the professional misconduct involved in this situation. By 10 o'clock Sunday morning, the systematic destruction of Mike's life was proceeding with the efficiency that had built Collins Hospitality through strategic acquisitions and hostile takeover scenarios. Every professional relationship he had corrupted would face consequences. Every institution he had defrauded would pursue restitution. Every person he had manipulated would learn exactly what role they had played in systematic betrayal. My phone rang with Carol's number, her voice carrying panic that suggested news was traveling quickly through family networks. Sarah, there are rumors about police investigations and legal problems. Please tell me you're not doing anything rash. I'm doing exactly what any responsible business owner would do when discovering systematic fraud. Carol, I'm protecting my company and pursuing legal remedies for criminal behavior. But we're family. Surely these issues can be resolved without involving outsiders. Family. Carol was invoking blood relationships to justify theft and betrayal while asking me to prioritize family loyalty over business ethics and legal compliance. Family members who steal from each other have chosen to make their problems legal matters rather than personal ones. Sarah, please think about what this will do to Jason and Brittany. They just got married. Their happiness shouldn't be destroyed by temporary family conflicts. Carol was using the newlyweds as emotional shields to protect Mike from consequences of his criminal behavior. She genuinely believed that I should accept ongoing theft to preserve the illusion of family harmony. Jason and Brittany's happiness was built on money stolen from me through fraud. If that foundation troubles them, they can return the funding and plan a celebration they can actually afford. The conversation ended with Carol's desperate pleas echoing the same themes that had characterized our family dynamic for 12 years. My obligation to accept minimal recognition while providing maximum support, regardless of how my generosity was repaid with betrayal and humiliation. But this time, the quiet woman they had all underestimated was responding with capabilities that extended far beyond their comprehension. And the education would continue until everyone involved understood exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone whose influence reached into every corner of the industry they had dismissed as a hobby business. The reckoning had begun, and it would reshape every assumption they had maintained about power, loyalty, and the cost of treating family members as renewable resources rather than human beings deserving of respect. By Monday morning, the cascading consequences of my weekend calls had begun reshaping the Collins family's understanding of reality in ways that would prove permanent and devastating. I sat in my Burlington office reviewing reports that felt like battlefield assessments from a war my family had started but never anticipated losing. Detective Hayes had moved with impressive speed to coordinate with federal authorities once the scope of Mike's fraud became clear. Home equity theft crossed state lines when the cryptocurrency investment involved offshore accounts. Electronic signature forgery triggered federal banking regulations. Attempted unauthorized access to business accounts fell under corporate fraud, statutes that carried prison sentences measured in years rather than months. My assistant knocked gently before entering with updates that would have felt satisfying if they were not also emotionally devastating. Mrs. Collins. Michael Collins was arrested at his office this morning. The charges include wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The district attorney's office is requesting an emergency hearing to freeze his assets pending investigation. Mike's insurance brokerage would not survive federal investigation into his business practices. Clients who discovered their broker was under indictment for fraud would flee to competitors regardless of the ultimate legal outcomes. Professional licenses would be suspended. Industry relationships would evaporate overnight. Jessica Walsh has been terminated from her consulting position for ethical violations and breach of client confidentiality. Her firm is conducting internal investigation to determine if other clients were compromised by similar misconduct. Jessica's career in hospitality consulting was over. No company would hire someone who had demonstrated willingness to steal confidential information for personal relationships. Professional reputation required decades to build and could be destroyed in days when trust was violated as systematically as she had betrayed her ethical obligations. The Collins family has received formal notification that all wedding-related expenses must be reimbursed within 30 days or face collection proceedings through civil court. $25,000 plus interest and administrative fees, money that would force Carol to sell her house, Jason to drain his retirement accounts, and Brittany to confront the reality that her dream wedding had been funded through criminal activity. My phone buzzed with a call from Jason, his voice carrying the shell-shocked confusion of someone whose world had been fundamentally altered overnight. Sarah, I don't understand what's happening. Mike is in jail. Jessica has been fired. The police are asking questions about money laundering. Can you please explain what's going on? Mike stole $30,000 through home equity fraud, attempted to steal $2 million from Collins Hospitality, conducted a 3-month affair with your wife's best friend, and coordinated systematic character assassination designed to exclude me from your wedding while keeping my funding. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear Jason processing information that destroyed his understanding of recent family dynamics. The wedding money was stolen. The wedding money was legitimate. Mike's home equity loan was obtained through forged spousal consent. He lost that money gambling on cryptocurrency, then used my wedding contribution to cover his tracks while planning to steal from my business to fund your reception. Sarah, I had no idea. I believe you, Jason, But ignorance doesn't change the fact that your celebration was built on criminal fraud that could have destroyed everything I've worked 15 years to create. What can we do to fix this? Return the money, all of it, immediately. Demonstrate that you recognize the ethical problems with accepting funding obtained through systematic betrayal and financial crime. Jason's promises to make restitution came with tears that sounded genuine through the phone connection. Whether his remorse would translate into meaningful action remained to be determined. But his recognition of moral accountability distinguished him from family members who continued seeking ways to minimize their responsibility. Carol's call came an hour later, her voice carrying the desperate authority of someone whose management strategies had proved inadequate for containing a crisis of this magnitude. "Sarah, you have destroyed our entire family over money. Mike is facing prison. Jessica's career is ruined. Jason and Brittany are drowning in debt. Was your revenge worth destroying so many lives?" The victim blaming reached stunning heights as Carol characterized criminal fraud as family disagreement while positioning my legal response as vindictive overreaction rather than appropriate defense of my business and personal dignity. "Carol, I didn't destroy your family. Mike destroyed your family when he chose to steal money, forge documents, conduct extramarital affairs, and coordinate systematic betrayal of someone whose generosity had supported his lifestyle for 12 years. But calling the police was excessive. These matters could have been resolved privately through family discussion. 30,000 in fraud, 2 million in attempted theft, federal banking violations, conspiracy to commit grand larceny. These are not family matters, Carol. These are serious crimes that require legal consequences. What about forgiveness? What about Christian charity? What about the values that hold families together through difficult times?" Carol was invoking religious obligation to excuse criminal behavior while asking me to prioritize family cohesion over business ethics and legal compliance. Christian charity does not require accepting ongoing theft. Family values do not include enabling systematic fraud. Mike chose to make this a legal matter when he chose to commit crimes. "Sarah, I'm begging you to reconsider. Call the district attorney. Drop the charges. Let our family heal from these wounds without external interference. The wounds were created by your son's criminal activity, not by my response to it. Healing requires accountability, not continued enablement of behavior that destroys trust and violates basic ethical standards." That afternoon brought news that Mike's arrest had triggered automatic review of his professional licenses by state insurance regulatory agencies. Companies that had entrusted him with fiduciary responsibility for client funds would demand immediate policy transfers. Business partnerships built over years of relationship development would dissolve overnight. David stopped by my office to review developments that had exceeded even his strategic projections for consequences. "Mike's bail hearing is scheduled for Thursday. Federal prosecutors are arguing that he represents flight risk due to the scope of his financial crimes and evidence of systematic deception. Will he get bail? Probably, but at a level that will require him to liquidate everything he owns: house, car, retirement accounts, life insurance policies. He'll be financially ruined even if he's eventually acquitted." And Jessica, unemployable in hospitality consulting. Her firm has issued public statements about terminating employees who violate client confidentiality. No competitor will risk hiring someone with her ethical record. The systematic destruction felt appropriate rather than excessive, given the scope of their coordinated betrayal. People who chose to steal from family members while planning to destroy the businesses that supported their lifestyle deserved consequences that matched the magnitude of their crimes. But as I reviewed reports documenting the collapse of relationships that had defined my adult life, I recognized that justice carried costs that extended beyond the guilty parties. Jason and Brittany's marriage would begin with crushing debt and family scandal. Carol would lose her home and financial security. Extended family members would choose sides in ways that might never heal. The quiet woman they had all underestimated had finally demonstrated the full scope of her capabilities. But victory in this battle felt more like survival than triumph, more like necessary defense than satisfying revenge. Tomorrow would bring additional consequences as the legal system continued processing crimes that had taken months to plan and moments to expose. And I would face those developments from the secure foundation of businesses and relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The education of the Collins family was nearly complete. Soon, they would fully understand what happened when you chose to betray someone whose influence extended far beyond anything they had imagined. 6 months after Mike's arrest, I stood in the conference room of my new corporate headquarters in Burlington, reviewing architectural plans for Collins Hospitality's expansion into the Canadian market. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Lake Champlain that reminded me daily of how much my professional life had evolved since the wedding that had changed everything. The legal proceedings had concluded with efficiency that reflected the overwhelming evidence David's investigators had compiled. Mike pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges and received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and full financial restitution. Jessica faced professional sanctions that effectively ended her career in hospitality consulting. Carol lost her house to pay legal fees and moved to subsidized senior housing in Springfield. But the most significant changes had nothing to do with criminal justice or financial recovery. The systematic destruction of my family relationships had forced a fundamental reevaluation of how I understood success, loyalty, and the cost of accepting less than I deserved from people who claimed to love me. My assistant entered with the morning's correspondence, including a letter that had been forwarded through my attorney's office. Mrs. Collins, this arrived from Jason Collins. Should I add it to the family communications file? Thank you, Maria. I'll review it personally. Jason's letter was handwritten on teaching stationery, the careful script of someone who understood that words carried permanent consequences in ways that verbal apologies never could. Dear Sarah, it began, Brittany and I want to provide an update on our efforts to make restitution for the wedding expenses and to share some perspectives we've gained during these difficult months. The letter continued with details of their financial sacrifices that demonstrated genuine commitment to accountability. Jason had taken a second job tutoring mathematics after school. Brittany had sold her car and jewelry to raise funds. They had moved from their apartment to a basement rental that allowed them to allocate maximum income toward debt repayment. We understand that money cannot repair the trust that was broken or undo the humiliation our family caused you. But we want you to know that your actions taught us about integrity and consequences in ways that will influence how we treat people for the rest of our lives. Most significantly, Jason described their decision to establish an annual scholarship fund for first-generation college students pursuing hospitality management careers. The fund would be supported by a percentage of their combined income until their restitution was complete, then maintained as permanent recognition of lessons learned through painful experience. We learned from you that success carries responsibility to support others, and that real strength comes from helping people without expecting recognition or gratitude in return. I set down the letter and walked to my windows, processing the recognition that some relationships could indeed be rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect, rather than family obligation or financial dependence. David knocked and entered with quarterly reports that documented Collins Hospitality's continued expansion, despite the personal turmoil that had surrounded recent months. Revenue is up 37% from last year, he reported with satisfaction. The publicity from the family situation actually enhanced our reputation for ethical business practices. Clients want to work with someone who demonstrates backbone when relationships become exploitative. The irony was remarkable. My willingness to pursue legal consequences for family betrayal had strengthened Collins Hospitality's market position by demonstrating that I would defend business integrity regardless of personal cost. 3 major hotel chains have approached us about management contracts for their New England properties. They specifically mentioned wanting leadership that combines business acumen with clear ethical boundaries. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, though the Vermont area code suggested local business. Mrs. Collins, this is Patricia Walsh from Elegant Events Planning. I wanted to provide an update on changes to our company policies that resulted from the wedding situation last year. Amanda had left the events planning business after the Collins wedding, overwhelmed by the ethical complexities of coordinating celebrations where family dynamics involve fraud and manipulation. Patricia had purchased the company and implemented new protocols designed to prevent similar situations. We now require direct authorization from all financial contributors for any changes to event coordination. We also maintain strict policies about communication channels that prevent unauthorized parties from providing instructions about celebrations they don't control. The wedding that had nearly destroyed my family relationships had also improved industry standards for protecting clients from exploitation by relatives who claimed authority they had never been granted. Mrs. Collins, I also wanted to mention that we've received several inquiries from potential clients who specifically requested our services because they heard about our ethical standards during difficult family situations. The Collins wedding had become a case study in professional integrity that enhanced business reputations rather than damaging them. My willingness to defend appropriate boundaries had created positive consequences that extended far beyond personal vindication. That evening, I sat in my new home office reviewing correspondence from industry colleagues who had offered partnership opportunities that would expand Collins Hospitality's influence throughout North America. The quiet woman who had preferred anonymous generosity was now recognized as a leader whose strategic thinking and ethical standards commanded respect across multiple business sectors. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tomorrow, I have news about the main acquisition." David's friendship had proven invaluable throughout the legal proceedings and business expansion that had followed the wedding crisis. His analytical perspective helped me process emotional challenges, while his strategic guidance ensured that Collins Hospitality continued growing despite personal turmoil. As I prepared for bed in the master suite that reflected my individual taste rather than compromise with someone else's preferences, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that Tuesday morning phone call from Amanda 9 months earlier. The marriage that had defined my adult identity was over, dissolved through no-fault divorce proceedings that had awarded me complete control of Collins Hospitality in exchange for assuming Mike's legal debts. The family relationships that had provided social structure for 12 years were permanently altered by criminal convictions and civil lawsuits. But in place of those losses, I had gained something more valuable than financial security or professional recognition. I had learned the difference between quiet strength and passive acceptance, between generous patience and enabling dysfunction. The woman who had spent years accepting minimal recognition while providing maximum support had finally established boundaries that commanded respect rather than exploitation. And those boundaries had created space for relationships built on mutual appreciation rather than one-sided sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Collins Hospitality continued expanding into markets where success required strategic thinking and ethical conduct. But those challenges would be faced from a position of strength that came from understanding my own worth and refusing to accept less than I deserved from people who claimed to care about my happiness. The education of the Collins family was complete. But my own education about power, respect, and the cost of underestimating quiet strength was just beginning. 1 year after the wedding that changed everything, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of Collins Hospitality's newest property, the Mountain View Resort in White Mountain National Forest. The room was filled with 300 guests representing the pinnacle of New England's hospitality industry, gathered for the annual awards ceremony of the Regional Tourism Development Association. The Crystal Award in my hands recognized Collins Hospitality as Business of the Year, acknowledging not just financial success but ethical leadership and community impact that had elevated industry standards across multiple states. The engraved inscription read, "For demonstrating that true strength comes from defending integrity, regardless of personal cost." When I started Collins Hospitality 15 years ago, I began, my voice carrying across the ballroom with confidence that had been earned through surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. I believed that success was measured primarily through financial metrics and market expansion. The audience included competitors who had once underestimated my capabilities, industry leaders who now sought partnerships with Collins Hospitality, and business colleagues who had watched my transformation from quiet family supporter to recognized regional powerhouse. I learned this year that success requires something more challenging than building profitable companies or expanding market share. It requires the courage to defend your values when the people closest to you attempt to compromise them. The story of Mike's fraud and the Collins family betrayal had become industry legend, though most versions focused on business ethics rather than personal drama. My willingness to pursue criminal charges against my own husband had sent clear signals throughout the hospitality community about the consequences of violating trust in professional relationships. Real strength is not about dominating others or accumulating wealth that insulates you from consequences. Real strength is about using your capabilities responsibly when others fail to show basic respect and decency. As I continued my acceptance speech, I caught sight of Jason and Brittany sitting at a table near the back of the ballroom. They had completed their financial restitution 6 months ahead of schedule and had driven to New Hampshire to attend the ceremony. Their presence represented forgiveness that had been earned through accountability rather than demanded through family obligation. The greatest lesson I learned was that quiet generosity becomes enabling behavior when it rewards people who treat kindness as weakness rather than recognizing it as strength. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, reflecting industry recognition of leadership that extended beyond business success into territory that challenged assumptions about professional ethics and personal boundaries. After the ceremony concluded, Jason approached me during the cocktail reception that followed the awards presentation. "Sarah, Brittany and I wanted to congratulate you personally," he said, his voice carrying genuine warmth rather than the careful neutrality that had characterized our family interactions for years. "We're incredibly proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Jason. Your presence here means more than you know." We also wanted to share some news. The scholarship fund we established has received its first applicant, a young woman from rural Vermont, whose family owns a small bed and breakfast that's struggling financially. She wants to study hospitality management to help save her family's business. The scholarship that had been created from painful lessons was already creating positive consequences for people who face challenges similar to those I had experienced during Colin's Hospitality's early years. Her story reminded us of everything you taught us about supporting others without expecting recognition in return, Brittany added, speaking publicly to me for the first time since their wedding. "We want our marriage to reflect the kind of integrity and generosity you demonstrated, even when we didn't deserve it." Their growth from entitled recipients of my funding into people who understood accountability and reciprocal respect represented the most satisfying outcome of the entire crisis. Some relationships could indeed be rebuilt on foundations of mutual appreciation rather than family obligation. David appeared with champagne in the satisfied expression of someone whose strategic guidance had contributed to achievements that exceeded original projections. "Colin's Hospitality is now the third largest boutique hotel chain in New England," he reported with pride. "We have partnership offers from 2 national hospitality corporations and expansion opportunities in 4 additional states." "More importantly," I said, raising my champagne glass toward the ballroom filled with industry colleagues who now treated me with the respect I had always deserved, "we've built something that can't be stolen or manipulated by people who confuse financial resources with personal weakness." The evening continued with conversations that reflected how completely my professional reputation had evolved since that Tuesday morning phone call from Amanda 14 months earlier. Competitors sought strategic partnerships. Industry leaders requested my participation on corporate boards. Business schools wanted case studies about ethical leadership during family crises. As the reception wound down, I found myself standing on the resort's terrace overlooking mountain valleys that stretched toward Vermont. The October foliage was spectacular, painted in colors that reminded me of the wedding that had nearly destroyed my family relationships but ultimately revealed the strength I had always possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, the first communication I had received from him since his release from federal prison 3 months prior. The message was brief. "Saw the news about your award. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you find happiness." I stared at the message for a long moment, processing how completely my emotional response had changed since discovering his betrayal. There was no anger, no satisfaction in his acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no desire for continued connection or closure. Just quiet recognition that some chapters of life close permanently when trust is violated beyond repair. I deleted the message without responding. The drive home through Vermont's mountain roads provided time to reflect on how fundamentally my understanding of strength and success had evolved. The woman who had once measured achievement through financial metrics and market expansion now understood that the greatest victories came from defending principles that could not be purchased or negotiated. Colin's Hospitality had grown into a regional empire worth more than $20 million. But the real triumph was learning that I deserved relationships built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. That quiet generosity should never become enabling behavior for people who treated kindness as weakness. As I pulled into the driveway of my new home, a restored farmhouse on 50 acres outside Burlington, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something that reflects your authentic values rather than compromising those values to maintain relationships with people who never appreciated what you offered. The house was dark except for security lighting that illuminated gardens I had planted without needing to consider anyone else's preferences. Every detail reflected individual choice rather than marital compromise. Every room contained furniture and artwork selected for personal meaning rather than family acceptance. In my home office, I reviewed messages from industry colleagues who had become genuine friends through shared commitment to ethical business practices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Collins Hospitality continued expanding into markets where success required strategic thinking and moral courage. But tonight, I sat quietly in the home I had chosen, surrounded by achievements I had earned, planning a future that would reflect my own priorities rather than family obligations that had never been reciprocal. The Collins family had taught me the most valuable lesson of my professional life, that real power whispers while insecurity shouts, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being willing to walk away from people who mistake your patience for weakness. The quiet woman they had underestimated for 12 years had finally learned to value herself as much as she had always valued others. And that education had created possibilities they could never have imagined, built on foundations they could never have provided. The empire I had built would continue growing, guided by principles that had been tested under the most challenging circumstances and proven unbreakable. The relationships I maintained would reflect mutual appreciation rather than exploitation. The future I was creating would demonstrate that success without integrity was not success at all. The wedding that had nearly destroyed my family relationships had ultimately revealed that some losses create space for gains that exceed anything you sacrificed. And the strength that had carried me through betrayal and legal battles would now guide Collins Hospitality toward achievements that honored everything I had learned about courage, respect, and the cost of accepting less than you deserve. The triumph was complete, but the journey was just beginning. 2 years later, Collins Hospitality was featured on the cover of Hospitality Executive magazine with the headline, "Building Empire on Ethics: How Sarah Collins Transformed Personal Crisis into Industry Leadership." The article would become required reading in business schools across New England, a case study in maintaining professional integrity during personal upheaval. The quiet woman who had once preferred anonymous generosity had become a recognized leader whose influence extended far beyond regional hospitality markets. But the greatest achievement remained the lesson that had emerged from the deepest betrayal, that real strength comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you refuse to accept. And in the mountains of Vermont, surrounded by the empire she had built with patience, principle, and unwavering respect for her own worth, Sarah Collins continued writing a story that would inspire others to recognize their own quiet strength and to use it wisely when the world mistook their generosity for weakness. If this story of quiet strength turning into unstoppable force resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps more people discover these powerful stories. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Sarah's journey, or tell us about a time you had to stand up for yourself when others underestimated you. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear that their quiet strength is actually their superpower. And subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to accept less than they deserved. Your support means everything to our community of strong, resilient individuals.